Good day, traders. I trust everyone had a great week. I hope you're looking forward to this week's technical market overview, as we will be discussing some great setups. Also, if you'd like to ask me questions about the markets or just have some suggestions regarding our videos or the format, why not visit the forum at forum.tradersforge.org and we will do our best to get back to you. I'm going to let the disclaimer roll and I will see you back in the charts. We are starting once again with the US dollar to South African rand. Our support and resistance levels from last week worked out quite well, with resistance at the weekly R1 being respected, and as we can see, that's exactly where the market then turned, as well as our support level that we mentioned at the weekly pivot. A strong rejection currently from the new weekly pivot and also this 50 SMA could indicate more downside, and if this were to happen, that would be possible that price move back into this area of support that I've highlighted in this red block. We can also see that the support is being offered additional levels of confluence from our 200 and 100 SMAs. If, however, price gets rejected from this area, and we can see that we have this lower boundary as our weekly S1 pivot, if that gets rejected and price breaks lower, then a next area of support would be around our weekly S2 and also this larger lower diagonal support boundary. If price can close back above the new weekly pivot, so that would be around 1550, which is also where it was rejected on Friday from the 50 SMA, that could set up bullish targets near our weekly R1 at about 1558. And if that breaks higher, then we can have a possible target as high as 1590, which is close to our weekly R2 and also just above our monthly R2. Looking now at the EURUSD. Last week we mentioned that there's a good possibility that price would move back into this area of support from the monthly pivot at about 1.215. That is indeed what we did see happening, after which price then formed what appears to be a right shoulder. And we can see we now have a head and shoulders pattern that seems to be playing out with the target projected lower at our weekly S2 pivot near 1.98. So that would be the projected target for this head and shoulders. That is also right below with the monthly S1. The new area of resistance would become the monthly support. So that would be at 1.215. That would be the new area of resistance. We also have the 4-hour 200 SMA that is now also acting as resistance. So if price can break back above that, and I'd say price would need to be back above 1.225 for this to start looking like a recovery again, and that would give us initial targets of 1.227, which is the weekly R2, and that could perhaps then be followed by the overhead target at the monthly R1. Just having a brief look now at the economic calendar for the week, we can see that we have only one medium impact event later today. On Wednesday we have only one event. And then on Thursday, there's quite a few events, including employment and unemployment rates for Australia. We have some events for Japan, as well as a few affecting the euro and USD. And then on Friday, of course, we also have quite a few events, as you can see. So just be mindful of those and trade safe. Having a look now at the GBPUSD. Last week saw the 4-hour 200 SMA acting as perfect support, with Friday's close testing the 4-hour 100 SMA, which is also the new weekly pivot. We have what appears to be this little double top formation that is formed, meaning that if this were to play out, it's very likely that we will see price move back into this area of support from the 4-hour 200 SMA, and which is also the monthly pivot. And if we look right below that, we also have our weekly S1 pivot. So this is a very likely target at this stage. However, if price can hold above the weekly pivot, it's possible that we can see price moving back higher towards the target at the weekly R1 pivot, that would be at 1.371, and if it can break higher from that level, then it's likely that it will retest this upper resistance boundary, and that could be near the weekly R2 and monthly R1 pivots near 1.383, so anywhere in that vicinity if it manages to break that high. Just considering that if price were to break lower, move into this area of support and fail, there's also this additional support that we have from the lower boundary from this larger channel, and that would also be near 1.342. So that would also be worth taking into consideration when price moves down into this area. And moving on to the Australian dollar USD. Generally, the bullish trend remains intact, with this 4-hour 100 SMA still acting as support. The consolidation range has also now expanded, and that would mean a break above this upper boundary at 0.781 could see the monthly R2 pivot being targeted, and that would be near 0.800. And of course, our lower boundary also close to the weekly S1 pivot from last week, and that would be at around 0.766. And if that were to break, that could potentially then target our weekly S3 pivot, and that is at 0.750. And that would just be mindful, of course, that we also have our 4-hour 200 SMA along with our monthly pivot and weekly S2 pivots at this level of 0.759, which could act as some support as well. So perhaps that full target would not necessarily be reached, as this is quite a strong area of support. And then, of course, just keeping an eye on price action might perhaps then see a bounce from this level. Moving on now to the Nasdaq. Last week saw muted price action with price trending slightly lower. It does seem to be looking for some support currently, which would likely be found from our monthly pivot, which is also where we'll have it meet up with the 4-hour 200 SMA. All of this happening at this 12,700 level. If price can find some support from this level, the new area of resistance would be our weekly pivot, which will also probably coincide with this 4-hour 100 SMA, and that is at the 12,900 level. We also have our overhead diagonal boundary acting as some resistance. However, a break above that could see price moving higher, first towards this area of resistance from our monthly R1, which was acting as resistance last week. And if that were to break, then we can expect a move higher towards the upper megaphone formation boundary, and that would be around, well, anywhere between 12,300 to 13,400. So anywhere in that area. If price were to break below support, that could see price moving towards support at either 12,500, which is the weekly S2 pivot, or perhaps lower towards this boundary area in the vicinity of 12,400, or at least not much lower, I'd say, than the monthly S1, which would be about 12,400. So yeah, that concludes the Nasdaq 100. Moving on now to Brent crude oil. Last week saw Brent crude oil mostly ranging sideways and in the process forming what seems to be a small head and shoulders pattern. The target for this head and shoulders pattern, should it play out, would be near our weekly S2 pivot at about 52.90. This is also very close to where we have our 4-hour 100 SMA, which has acted as support previously. So if that area were to hold, we could perhaps expect a recovery with initial resistance from this neckline, which is sitting just below our new weekly pivot at 55.60. If this full target does not play out and we see a recovery, I would see a recovery above the weekly R1 pivot at 56.60 as an invalidation of this head and shoulders pattern, possibly setting up a bullish target near the weekly R2 at 58.40. And that is also major diagonal overhead resistance. Also, just be mindful that we have some additional support a bit lower from our 4-hour 200 SMA at about 51.40. If price were to break lower than this weekly S2 pivot area. And that's why I've highlighted this area, as this whole area could become an area of potential support and potential bearish targets should this short start to play out. We are now having a look at gold. After getting rejected from the 4-hour 200 SMA last week, we are once again testing this lower diagonal boundary. This boundary is very important, as a break below this boundary could potentially see a second sell-off for gold, perhaps seeing a target realized as low as 1,730. That is where we have our monthly S2 pivot. However, if this level are to hold and we can get price back above, let's say at least this weekly R1 pivot at 1,855, that could see this key area of resistance being retested, and that would be near the weekly R2, or actually slightly just below that, and that is where we have our 4-hour 100 SMA and also our upper diagonal boundary. If this level were to hold, we might see either some more consolidation within these two diagonal boundaries, or we could perhaps see a breakout which will lead price higher towards, at least initially, this monthly R1 pivot at 1,944. We are once again concluding this week's market overview by looking at Bitcoin. For a change, we will also have a look at Bitcoin from the 4-hour time frame, as we usually have a look at it from a higher time frame. But just looking at what happened over the past 2 weeks, we can see that Bitcoin has started to consolidate sideways in what appears to be this triangular range, with the upper and lower diagonal boundaries quite clear at this stage. And of course, that would be the areas to keep an eye out for a breakout to either side. At this stage, the lower diagonal boundary does remain intact, meaning our bullish trend has not yet broken. We are also seeing that this 4-hour 100 SMA is currently holding up quite well. And of course, we can see that we have this major horizontal support highlighted in purple, and that is currently right at the bottom of this boundary at 33,700. Of course, if price can manage to find some support from this area, we'll probably see that retest of the upper diagonal boundary. A breakout from this boundary could then set up targets initially, at least, to this weekly R2 pivot at 45,000. However, if we do see a breakout lower, that could see price move much lower, at least to this monthly pivot area, which coincides with the weekly S2 at 25,300. Well, that's it for this week's market overview. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see everyone the same time next week. This is John Jacobs for RMDTRADER. Remember to trade smart and trade successful.